Hi, welcome to Tech Ranch, a place where we learn and earn technical skills in the most efficient way. Let's make coding fun. All about Java Constructor. Today we are going to present you an informative session all about constructor with syntaxes and live implementation with lots of examples in Java. Before we get into the implementation, let's first see what is actually constructor. Constructor is a block of codes similar to the method which is called when an instance of the class is created. Let us first try to understand what is actually a constructor. As the name mentioned, it's constructing a building, a person who helped to construct the building or tower. Now here, in terms of software application, we can pretend a constructor is going to help you to constructing an application. Since we know the Java works on objects and classes, we need a person who can help to create an application or constructing an application with the help of constructor. Now, constructor basically is a special type of method which is used to initialize the object. As we know, inside the method, we keep our sequence of instructions for the compiler. Now, in general, a regular method is simple, which can be manipulated in a different way, but it cannot be invoked automatically for the compiler because it's a regular method. Now, constructor is a special kind of method that is used to initialize the object automatically once the object is created. That's why it's something like we are building a tower and we need a space to start the thread for constructing the tower. So that is the person called constructor. Whenever we use to create an object of a class, the constructor will be invoked automatically with the help of compiler. Every time an object is created, whenever we use new keyword, it calls a default constructor if there is no constructor available in the class. In such case, Java compiler provides a default constructor, that is by default. So basically what is happening, whenever we create an object of a class inside a main method, the default constructor will be invoked and that instance of that class will be starting to create an instance of your application. So in case if a programmer or Java developer forget to define or declare any kind of constructor, default constructor will be invoked once it is create an object of that class. Now let's first see in detail about all constructor. So as you can see, this is the way we define the constructor. We have a class, public class constructor demo. Inside the main method, we simply defining the class name, creating an object with the help of new keyword, and here the same class name method is mentioned here. This is what is called constructor. This is how we define constructor. There are three types of constructors: default, no arguments, and parameterized. We'll see that in detail later. Now first see how it is working, how the constructor works. So we have seen the class name and the object and the new keyword and the constructor. That's nothing but the method of the class name. Now here, when we defined a class constructor demo, public constructor demo is mentioned here. This is the constructor. We can have some method definition, the constructor definition and implementation. Now inside the main method, we create new we are using the new keyword and creating an instance of the class with the help of the constructor demo. Now new keyword creates the object of constructor demo class and invokes constructor to initialize the created object. Now once the compiler starts from the main method and it goes to the next instruction where it is mentioned that creating an object with the help of the constructor, it will automatically go to the constructor definition and check out the implementation and display. Now suppose in case that it is not mentioned, as it is not mentioned here, it will still create an object and create an instance with the help of this constructor because it is being used here in the main method. So this is how the constructor work. Now let's take a look at the types of constructors in detail one by one. Default constructor. Default constructor is used to provide the default values to the object like 0, null, etc. depending on the type. Compiler create default constructor at the time of invoked automatically. So as you can see in the example, we have a default constructor demo and defined 3 variables and having an add addition implementation. That's a different method. Now here you can see it is not mentioned any kind of constructor, definition, implementation, declaration, nothing is mentioned here. Now inside the main method, we create an object with the help of the new keyword and calling the default constructor here. Now this will invoke the constructor and create an instance of this class, and automatically we can have the object of this class and use this method here, and this will display the output. So this is how the default constructor works. If programmer didn't mention any kind of constructor definition, the compiler will create it at the time of invoked automatically. Now next, see no argument constructor. This is equally same as the default constructor. The difference is it is not mandatory to have any kind of method implementation. Inside the constructor, you can have the implementation too, and that implementation can be executed just by creating a new instance without defining it. So what is happening here, the constructor with no arguments is also known as no arg constructor. The signature is same as default constructor. However, body can have any code, unlike default constructor where the body of the constructor is empty. So in case of default constructor, we don't have any implementation, but in case of no argument, we can have a kind of implementation inside the body of the constructor. Cannot be called default constructor since you have written the code of it. So this is not a default constructor, this is a no argument constructor. Now in case of this is the syntaxes and declaration and definition are just the same as the default. The difference is we have the implementation mentioned inside the constructor. So you can see the addition implementation is done. We have defined 3 variables and perform the addition and display the answer. And instead of creating a class and definition, just calling the new instance and creating a new instance of class using constructor. Now next is parameterized constructor. This is very useful. Some places we called constructor with arguments. Since constructor is equally same as a regular method, the difference is just same class name. So this parameterized constructor has some specific number of parameters which is mentioned inside the signature, you can see, and used to provide different values to distinct object. So you can provide the same values also. So you can see here, this example is again for the addition. We have 2 inputs defined in the class, and inside the constructor we are passing 2 arguments. And now these 2 arguments is assigned to those member variables, and the addition method is providing the output of it. Now inside the main method, I'm creating an instance of this class using new keyword and calling invoking the constructor, the parameterized constructor, and passing 2 arguments. And I'm just simply calling the addition method. So what will happen? This 20 and 10 will be passed to this parameterized constructor, and this will assign to the input values, and this input values will further add and this method. Whenever this method is invoked, this will display the execution of this instruction. So this is how the parameterized constructor implemented. This is most of the time used in the getter and setter method, you can find out, and which is the best example to understand about the constructors. Now next we have constructor chaining. This is very interesting to understand. When a constructor calls another constructor of same class, then this is called constructor chaining. It's like creating a bond from one to another constructor and communicating between and making a communication continue with the another constructors. So if you see here, I have a class chain constructor demo, and this class has two member variables, integer and string. And the example is for a kind of e-commerce application where we have some types of shirts or some garments with different size and measures and number of counts, and we need to check our stock or overstock or understock or inventory management system. So that the place we can consider this example and understand this constructor chain constructor concept. We have a default constructor mentioned here, and this size is small. To understand this, we have presented a session before this constructor session about super. In this, there you can learn about this keyword, but for now, just to understand, this is basically pointing to the current object of that class, the child on the current class. So here what is happening when the main method inside the main method, the compiler starts from the main method, and from there it will create an object of this class, and new keyword can create a invoke the constructor and create an instance of this class. And when this constructor is being called, it will go to the default constructor, and here it mentioned like this is small. So s is the size is small. This is the variable. Now, since this constructor doesn't have the argument, so it will go to that constructor which has an argument of string. So it will go to the next chain constructor demo constructor which has the argument of string, that is size. And inside this constructor implementation, or the body of this has mentioned size comma 32. So that means now it has to call that constructor which has two arguments. One is string and another is integer. Then next it will go to the next constructor definition which has a string size and int measurements, and that will have these values assigned. So this dot s means your member variable equals size that argument, and this dot m is like measure and equals to measurements. And inside this class we have a display method which will display the values of these variables. And whenever in the main method, inside the main method, when we call this display method using this object, this will display the value of size equals s, that is your small, and the measure is like 32. So this is how you can use a chain constructor, and it communicate like one to the next and the next based on the arguments, based on the signature of the constructor. It will keep adding and accumulating the values, the data from the logic or from the implementation of your constructor. So this is what the constructor chaining. This is very interesting and very important concept to understand, and very useful, mostly like in inventory management or library management or school management systems. That's the place it is efficiently being used. Now next we have copy constructor and constructor overloading. Now let's take a look at this one by one. Copy constructor is used for copying the values of one object to another object. It copies the values of one to another when the object that invokes this constructor. Now you can see that example here. It has a class copy constructor demo having a variable message, and this message has some values. And the only difference in this type of concept is we need to create another constructor that has an argument of the class object and the copy of the values of that constructor, and display is basically nothing but the message. So what is happening when inside the main method, the compiler will see the first object is what original, and copy constructor is this hello message. Now basically when it's a regular constructor which has a hello method, and this will add with your display method, and when it is being called, it will display from original welcome to TechRanch and hello. This is added and concatenated the message. Now when it comes to the copy, it will go to the compiler will go to the next instruction where it is mentioned copy and create an object of copy constructor. But this constructor has an argument of the original class object. So what is happening, it's pretty interesting to see. Inside the copy, we have the same values, which is basically implemented in your original constructor. So whatever you have the values in your message in the original constructor is being copied in this object and passing to the next constructor. So you can create as many as a constructor like this. So when it executes, the compiler will first execute from the original and then it will copy and print the message from the copy object. So this is how you can use the copy constructor whenever we need to copy some values from one data to another data. For example, we have a stock which we need to copy and put it in an RSS feed. That type of application is being very useful for just copying from values from the internet to the downloaded here with the help of RSS feed and direct feeding. So that's the place you can use the copy constructor. Now, when it comes to the constructor overloading, that's a concept of having more than one constructor with different parameters list in such a way so that each constructor performs a different task. To understand the constructor overloading, first we need to know the method overloading. Constructor is nothing but a kind of a method. It's just a different features, but it is the same. So we have the method overloading where we have the different signatures and we runtime execution. The compiler will check the argument and based on that it will invoke that particular method and execute it. Similarly, we have the constructor overloading. Constructor overloading, you can see in the example, we have integer, string and integer. Constructor overloading with two arguments and that arguments is assigned based on the member variables. Another constructor with the same name but the difference is in their signature. They have the three arguments, int, i's, n and a, and this is again assigned as a member variable, and in the display we are printing the values. Now in the compiler, it goes to the main and see the first instruction where we are creating an object and the constructor is passing with two arguments. That particular point, the compiler will go to that constructor which has two arguments and execute based on that. So assign I equals to 101 and string n equals to TechRanch. And based on that, ID and name will be changed. And when it called the display, the ID and the name will be displayed here, 101 and TechRanch. Now when it comes to the next instruction or the next object created with the same class, but the constructor has three arguments, at that time the display value will be based on the that three arguments. So the compiler will go to the constructor which has three arguments and assign the values, and display will have that particular values and display when inside the main method it will call, that values will be displayed here. So this is how the constructor overloading will work. Now let's take a look at the demonstration. Inside the demonstration, what we are going to do, we take an example of employee. Just taking a simple employee class which has four arguments, which has four member variables: first name, last name, designation and salary. So when it comes to the getter and setter values, we have to have some variables which contains these values individually so that we can put it inside the database. Now to have such values in a constructor will help you to get from the user and set it in the database. So here what we are going to do with the help of the constructor, we are going to get the values from the user and store it in a variable, and that variable will further using JDBC API in many ways you can input it inside the database. So here we are just going to take the values, some constant values in the variable with the help of the constructor. Now let's take a look at the demonstration. So this is my Eclipse IDE and I am going to have a class of already created my project, and the class is employee demo, and this class has a main method, and inside the main method, inside the class, we need to create some variables. I'm going to have one more variable, employee ID, and string first name, last name, designation, and integer salary. So these are the variables we need to get the value from the user and store it in a variable with the help of the constructor. Now next step, we need to create a constructor. So constructor, inside the constructor, you don't have to make it public and any specific modify specify. Here we are going to use, since we have variables to assign, let's take a parameterized type of constructor. That's the best place to use when we have some values to assign it in the database or get the value and put the data from the user. So these things can be included in the in online application with the help of JSPs and servlet that you can learn from the following courses. Now we have to assign employee ID with your constructor argument value. First name equals you can use the this operator and super operator we have learned. There's so many ways you can do it. And position, designation will be assigned to your position, right? So that's why the best way to code is using this ID that will help you to use the better efficient coding, you see. So, and help you to minimize your errors. Display the values. So employee ID, and first name. So make sure you're using these member variables to print the values, and your last name and designation and salary. So you see, so we have implemented the display method. All we need to call, and now let's go to the main method, and inside the main method, let's create a class object. Now here we need to use the parameterized constructor. So we the compiler is the ID asking for the arguments based on the signature. So first ID, suppose I give this ID, and strong first name will be your tech ranch, last name will be your Java tutorials, position will be your Java developer programmer, and salary, or you can pass as many as values. So values you can put it here. Tom Best, designation programmer, developer, and the salary will be some random values. And after that, all we need to display. So now it's that's how you can add as many as values, and using scanner you can make it runtime execution. So you see, using constructor we can get the values, and these values will be saved in your variables, and these values can be send it to the database using JDBC API. So all we need, parameterized constructor. So this is the live demonstration and implementation of parameterized constructor. Why do we need constructor? Now let's first see what is the importance of constructor and what are the important facts to make sure we learn about constructor. The purpose of constructor is to initialize the object of a class, while the purpose of a method is to perform the task by executing Java code, while methods can be. So this is the difference between the constructor and method. It's very important to understand because many times in interviews and discussions, it's always being a question like what is the difference between a constructor and method. Definition is method has to be called, while constructor is always automatically called whenever it create an object and create an instance. And whenever it being invoked, the instance will be created automatically by the Java compiler. And constructor can be overloaded. We have seen the overloading constructor implementation. Constructor can be chained. We have seen the chain constructor. Call constructor using this and super keyword. Constructor is not inherited in Java. We cannot inherit the constructor. Constructor should have the same name as class they belong to. Constructor doesn't have return type. Static initializer and instant initializer block are executed before the constructor. Superclass constructor is executed before subclass. Construct invocation must be first line. A constructor cannot be final, abstract, or synchronized. Consider providing no argument constructor. Constructor doesn't return anything. Interface do not have constructor because interfaces are not a class kind of thing. Constructors cannot be abstract, final, static, and synchronized. Homework time. Now let's see how we can practice constructor. Write a class with practice implementing different types of constructor for school management system application. Create a class named student result, getting the values like string first name, last name, string grade, and integer marks. You can have some message like passed or failed, that also you can add. Student ID you can add. And the more importantly, what you can add here using scanner, get the values at the runtime from the user. And practice the constructor. In case of any questions or source code needed or any kind of assistance, please feel free to contact techcrunch2019@gmail.com. Thank you so much for watching this video. Please subscribe to our channel and stay tuned for more upcoming interesting informative sessions. Let's make coding fun. Thank you.